The biting wind howled through the twisted trees of that dense forest in rural Romania, where a small, time-forgotten village held stories no one dared to tell aloud. I, Anna, had come to visit my great-uncle, a reserved man who had lived in an isolated cabin for decades. He rarely spoke, except when dusk began to tint the sky red, at which point his words became shadows that hung over us. On that first night, after a silent dinner by flickering candlelight, my great-uncle told me about the curse that weighed upon those lands. He explained that, about 100 years ago, an ancient cult sacrificed several victims in the forest, in macabre rituals, seeking supernatural power. The bodies were left exposed, with the trees as silent witnesses to a violence that time could not erase. Since then, residents began to mysteriously disappear, some returning with inexplicable marks, others never seen again. "You shouldn't walk these trails alone at night," he warned, his eyes seeming to glimpse something beyond our world. I smiled nervously, disbelieving, but couldn't help a shiver that ran down my spine. Before going to sleep, I heard light, dragging. Footsteps outside the cabin, as if someone or something was observing my every move. The next morning, I decided to explore the forest, armed with a flashlight and the old diary I found in the cabin's attic. The yellowed pages recounted encounters with hooded figures that emerged from among the trees, whispering secrets in forgotten tongues. One passage caught my attention, a description of a sacrifice in the heart of the forest, where spilled blood would have sealed a pact with dark forces. My heart raced as I imagined the cruelty of those acts. As I ventured deeper, the air became denser, almost suffocating, and a thick mist enveloped everything, making every step a challenge. It was then that I heard an agonizing scream echoing through the trees, a sound that froze my blood and made me run in despair. On the way back, I noticed fresh marks on the ground, human footprints mixed with deep claw marks, as if a horrid animal had hunted a victim that night. Back at the cabin, my great-uncle didn't seem surprised. "They are still here," he said, handing me a small wooden cross. "Use this to protect yourself, but know that not everything can be warded off." Over the following days, I witnessed inexplicable phenomena. Objects moved by themselves, whispers invaded the dark corners of the room, and an invisible presence seemed to haunt my sleep, provoking nightmares of torture and death. On one of those nights, I woke up with an overwhelming sense of panic. A black figure pressed against my chest, sucking my breath. I tried to scream, but only a faint groan escaped. Only the cross in my hand shone with a faint light, pushing away that shadow that seemed to want to drag me into the abyss. On the penultimate night, the horror reached its peak. My great-uncle disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a letter written in blood, a warning for me to flee before it was too late. The forest, once silent, began to emit sounds of laments and cries, while spectral figures emerged from among the trees, their empty eyes fixed on me. I felt it was time to leave, but it was as if something was holding me there, as if the very earth didn't want me to go. With a heavy heart, I abandoned the cabin at dawn, looking back only once. I saw a hooded figure waving like an invitation or a threat. On the dirt road, I tried to convince myself that it was all the fruit of a lonely old man's imagination, but the weight of fear still pressed on my chest. The darkness of that second night in the village seemed denser, as if it were alive, breathing around me. I had barely rested since my great-uncle disappeared, and the loneliness weighed heavily. I decided to venture into the forest again, but this time accompanied by an old kerosene lantern, whose flickering light barely pierced the black shroud that enveloped me. The mist remained thick, and the feeling of being watched became overwhelming. As I walked, I heard the distant sound of faint music, almost imperceptible, a guttural chant that seemed to come from the depths of the forest. I followed the sound, instinctively drawn, even though I knew I shouldn't. I reached a clearing where a circle of people with dark hoods chanted in an ancient language. Their faces were shadows, but their eyes glowed with an intense red that seemed to pierce the soul. In the center, a bloody figure lay on the ground, motionless, a victim of the ritual I had only read about in the diary. Suddenly, one of the participants noticed me. He rose slowly, extending a hand in my direction. A chilling cold ran through me, and fear paralyzed me for an instant. With all the strength I could muster, I ran toward the cabin, feeling the invisible presences trying to grab my feet, my hair, whispering promises of eternal suffering. When I arrived, I locked the door, and silence fell for a few minutes until they began pounding on the wood, as if spectral hands were trying to break down the entrance. That same night, a dark voice began to whisper my name, coming from the attic. Reluctantly, I climbed the creaking stairs to investigate and found an old wooden box, locked with rusted chains. Breaking the padlock, I opened the box, and inside was a pile of macabre objects: broken bones, black candles, and a dagger with undecipherable symbols on its blade. The cold instantly intensified, and I felt a chilling breath on my neck. When I turned around, there was nothing, but a word was carved into the wooden floor: flee. The next day I went to the village to seek help, but the few people I found seemed fearful, avoiding eye contact. An elderly woman warned me that the forest was a gateway to something that should not be disturbed. They are the guardians of the secret, she said with a trembling voice, and whoever tries to unveil it pays the price with blood and soul. Local stories spoke of disappearances, of residents who went mad and ended in bloody tragedies. During the night, the attacks intensified. Shadows invaded the rooms, scratching the walls, while distant screams echoed in the cold air. The wooden cross my great-uncle had given me seemed to pulsate with its own energy. But that didn't stop me from witnessing the horrifying death of one of the residents who tried to help me. A strong and courageous man who was found the next day. His body twisted into impossible positions, his eyes open and filled with a terror that still haunts me today. I couldn't stay any longer. I took the little I had and left the village at dawn, but the feeling that something was following me never left. During the journey back, at a stop on a deserted road, a black car pulled up beside me. The driver, a man whose face was hidden by shadows, stared at me intently and whispered, "You shouldn't have seen what you saw." I sped away and didn't look back. The days that followed were a blur of fear and solitude. I had managed to reach the nearest city, but even there, the weight of that curse seemed to follow me. I started receiving strange messages on my phone, nonsensical texts, random numbers, and even recordings of voices whispering my name. One night I woke up with the sensation that someone was sitting on the edge of my bed, breathing heavily. When I turned on the light, there was nothing, but on the wall, there was a symbol drawn in dried blood, a kind of ancient rune that I only recognized from my great-uncle's diary. Desperate for answers, I sought help from a local historian, a man named Victor, who studied ancient cults and paranormal phenomena. He listened to my story carefully and agreed to help me investigate the origin of that evil. According to him, the ritual in the forest had opened a portal to a dark plane, where entities known as the Watchers resided, beings that feed on human fear and pain, maintaining the forest under their dominion. For them, the bodies left in the ritual were just the beginning, as their true desire was to corrupt living souls. Victor showed me documents and reports from other nearby villages, all marked by inexplicable tragedies and disappearances. One of the most horrifying cases spoke of a young woman who went mad after finding a talisman similar to the one I had found in the attic box. She ended up murdering members of her own family before disappearing, leaving behind a cryptic message written in blood on the wall. "They come to reclaim what is ours." That night, as we reviewed the documents, the house lights began to flicker, and a chilling wind swept through the room. A gigantic shadow was cast on the wall, and a cavernous voice uttered a phrase that still sends shivers down my spine. "The veil has broken." Victor tried to contact a local priest, but the phone didn't work, as if the darkness itself had blocked all help. It was then that a series of macabre events unfolded. Friends disappeared without a trace. A black sore appeared on my right hand, growing and throbbing with excruciating pain, as if I were being branded by an invisible force. I knew time was running out, that this curse was not just a tale, it was a death sentence. Gradually, I realized that the barriers between our world and theirs were crumbling. One night, I woke up to a horrendous scream echoing in my ears. I rushed to the window and saw a figure with fiery eyes walking through the empty streets. Its skin seemed to melt and flow like living lava. I knew it was one of the Watchers coming for me. I remember thinking, if I'm going to die, let it be fighting. With Victor's help, we tried to perform a closing ritual based on ancient texts that promised to seal the portal. But the darkness was stronger, the forest seemed alive, and at one point the entire house trembled as if it were being swallowed by an ancestral force. The night was starless, and a heavy silence settled over the city as we decided to confront what remained of that curse. The closing ritual required us to return to that cursed forest where it all began, and there, among the twisted trees and the ground covered with dead leaves, we would feel the dark pulse of that place that seemed to want to swallow our souls. Victor carried an ancient book, written in Latin and forgotten symbols, while I carried the wooden cross my great-uncle had given me, a talisman of protection that I no longer knew if it would be of any use. With each step we took, the air grew, colder and heavier, as if the forest itself exhaled a malignant energy, desiring our surrender. Distant sounds echoed, laments, distorted laughter, and the sound of chains dragging on the ground. We reached the clearing where I had witnessed that grim ritual and where so many lives had been cut short. In the center, there was a black stone, covered with symbols that pulsed with a red, almost living light. Victor began to recite the words of the ritual, his voice firm but trembling, while I held the cross tightly. Gradually, the ground seemed to tremble, and from the shadows, spectral figures emerged, their distorted forms and expressionless faces watching us with empty eyes. One of them approached, and I smelled the putrid stench of death. Its voice was a whisper that cut through the silence. "You shouldn't be here." Suddenly, a gust of wind extinguished the lantern, and we were left in complete darkness, except for the red light emanating from the stone. Amidst the chaos, I heard a piercing scream. Victor had been grabbed by invisible hands and pulled into the shadow. Desperate, I tried to pull him back, but it was as if something was pushing me away, freezing my movements. What happened in the following minutes is a blur in my memory. I know I ran, that I tried to resist, that I felt their presence, getting closer and closer, trying to engulf me in their eternal darkness. When I finally managed to break free, Victor had disappeared, and the black stone began to crack, releasing a thick smoke that rose into the sky like a premonition of disaster. I returned to the city, but something in me had changed. The mark on my arm spread, transforming my skin into a black, cold tissue as if I were being consumed from within. Horrifying dreams pursued me, scenes of violent deaths, faces contorted by fear, and the constant sensation that my steps were followed by invisible shadows. News of my absence in the forest spread, and some people began to avoid my presence, whispering that I was cursed, that the forest had completely taken me. On a rainy night, I woke up to loud knocks on the door. It was a man with a lost look talking about the forest, saying he had seen Victor being taken to a place where light couldn't reach. He left a message. "The curse doesn't end until the last of the Watchers is banished. You are the key." But I didn't know how. I didn't know if I had the strength to continue. Fear consumed me, and the only thing I wanted was to forget everything, close my eyes, and never remember those nights again. However, the truth is, there is no escape for those who touch the veil between worlds. The forest does not forget. The Watchers do not forgive. And I still hear every night the slow footsteps of those who walk among the shadows, waiting to reclaim what was stolen from them. After that night, my life became an endless nightmare. The mark on my arm transformed into a black scar that pulsed like a dead heart, reminding me that something was growing inside me, something that wasn't human. People in the city started avoiding me as if I were death itself, whispering that I was connected to Victor's disappearance, that the forest had completely claimed me. Fear turned into paranoia, and every shadow seemed like a lurking figure. The dreams became more intense, too vivid to ignore. I saw the souls of those sacrificed in the ritual, screaming and trying to escape the darkness that imprisoned them. Sometimes, upon waking, I felt icy hands touching my skin, as if a specter was trying to drag me to the other side. On a rainy morning, I decided I had to confront it to the end. I returned to the forest, even knowing I probably wouldn't come out alive. I carried only my great-uncle's cross and the determination to end that curse. In the clearing, the black stone had disappeared, but in its place was a fissure in the ground, dark as an abyss, exuding an energy so dense it seemed to suck everything around it. I heard voices, macabre laughter, and the sensation that something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to attack. I descended slowly into that abyss, the darkness swallowing me like an endless ocean. Down below, among the narrow stone corridors, I found Victor, or what was left of him, a shapeless shadow, imprisoned, his empty eyes pleading for liberation. With my last ounce of strength, I began to recite an ancient prayer, mingled with the words from the book Victor had given me. The shadows tried to stop me, their invisible hands squeezing my chest, suffocating my breath. But I continued, propelled by the hope of saving what could still be saved. Finally, an intense light erupted from the abyss, blinding everything and everyone. The screams of the watchers echoed through the forest, weakening until they disappeared into a sepulchral silence. The fissure closed, and I felt my body released from the dark weight it carried. I emerged from there changed, forever marked by that experience, but free from the curse that threatened to destroy my soul. What happened in that forest taught me that some secrets must remain buried, and that the line between life and death can be thinner than we imagine. If you've made it this far, know that darkness is always lurking. In places where light doesn't reach, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And if one day you hear distant music on a cold night, or footsteps that shouldn't be there, remember, you might not be alone. If you enjoyed this dive into the unknown, if you felt that chilling sensation that only a good horror story can bring, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Here, we don't just tell stories. We create a community where fear becomes a bond between us. I want to hear from you. What was the most terrifying moment of this story? Have you ever felt something you couldn't explain? Tell us in the comments. Your experience could be the next legend we explore together. Thank you for staying until the end, and remember, fear only exists as long as we have the courage to face it. Until the next tale.